Before I tell you about the absolute shock that ripped through that room and the look of pure panic on my father's face, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. The air inside the community center felt thick, heavy with the kind of unspoken tension that makes your chest ache. I stood near the makeshift altar, adjusting the cuffs of my rented charcoal suit. My palms were sweating. To my right, the rows of gray metal folding chairs were slowly filling up with the people who truly mattered in my life. Co-workers, mentors, and the incredible family of my fiancée, Chloe. They were laughing, taking pictures, and filling the room with a genuine, undeniable warmth. But to my left, the atmosphere was entirely different. Felt like a funeral. My family sat in the very front row, isolated from everyone else by choice. They looked like they were being held hostage. My dad, Robert, a man whose entire identity was built on corporate dominance and country club memberships, leaned over to my mother. He did not even bother to lower his booming voice. "I cannot believe he is actually doing this to us," Dad muttered. His eyes, sharp and critical, scanned the scuffed linoleum floor, the faded paint on the walls, and the simple grocery store flower arrangements Chloe and I had stayed up until midnight putting together. A community center wedding. What will people think? This is so embarrassing. Look at this cheap venue. It smells like a public gymnasium. Mom nodded vigorously, adjusting her designer silk dress uncomfortably, pulling her expensive leather purse tighter into her lap as if the folding chair itself might try to steal it. "It is a disaster, Robert. I told him we would pay for a real venue. The country club or at least the downtown hotel. But no, he insists on this poverty display." Sitting right next to them was my older brother, Carter. Carter was a high-powered corporate lawyer, the undisputed golden child of the family, a man who measured human worth strictly by salary and zip code. He checked his heavy gold watch, sighing loudly enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "I mean, what is he trying to prove with this budget wedding?" Carter scoffed, turning to his colleague Julian, who had tagged along just to spectate the train wreck. "Maybe he is finally ready to admit he made a massive mistake. Maybe he wants to come crawling back to the firm now that he sees how the real world actually works. Give it a year, he will be begging us for a loan." I gripped the fabric of my trousers, forcing myself to take a slow, deep breath. 5 years. 5 long years of this exact same contempt. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to be ashamed of the life I had built from the ground up, the choices I had made, and the incredible woman I was about to marry. Through the crack in the side door, I could see Chloe getting ready. She looked absolutely radiant, a vision in her simple white dress, completely unfazed by the icy, toxic glare radiating from my family's section of the room. She knew the truth. She was the only one who did. "Are you sure you don't want to tell them?" my groomsman Gabriel whispered. He stepped up beside me, looking incredibly sharp in his fitted suit. Gabriel was a former street kid, someone society had completely thrown away, someone I had fought tooth and nail to save. Now, he was a pre-med student at the top of his class. I shook my head, my jaw set tight. "No, Gabe. They made their choice 5 years ago when they cut me off and threw me out. They want to look down on me so they can feel superior. Let them look down. Let them think they have won." Right then, my phone vibrated heavily in my chest pocket. A single text message. I pulled it out and read the short line on the screen. It was go time. I looked up at the heavy double doors at the back of the hall. The low, mocking murmur of my family's complaints was about to be silenced permanently. But to understand the sheer gravity of what was about to happen in that room, you need to understand how we got to this freezing point. You need to know what happened the night my father decided I was no longer his son. The memory of that dinner 5 years ago still tastes like copper in my mouth. It was a cold November evening. The massive mahogany dining table in my parents' sprawling, gated estate was set with fine china and crystal glasses. Carter sat across from me, casually swirling a vintage red wine in his glass, looking incredibly pleased with himself. I had just graduated from college with a degree in social work, and I had just done the unthinkable. I had declined the lucrative corporate sales position my father had arranged for me at his firm. "You are wasting your education," Dad said, his voice dangerously low, the kind of quiet that precedes a hurricane. He placed his expensive steak knife down on the porcelain plate with a sharp, echoing clink. "You are embarrassing this family, David. Social work? You want to wipe the noses of street criminals for minimum wage? Is that your grand plan for life?" "They aren't criminals, Dad," I replied, forcing myself to look him directly in the eyes. "They are kids who have fallen through the cracks. They are dealing with broken homes, violence, and a system that does not care about them. They need help." I accepted a job at the youth residential facility downtown. "I start on Monday," Mom gasped, pressing a manicured hand to her chest as if I had just announced I was joining a cult. "David, please, tell me this is just a phase. Tell your father you are joking right now. You cannot possibly live on that pathetic salary. How will you ever afford a decent life? How will you buy a house? You are throwing your entire future into the garbage." Carter leaned forward, that signature, infuriating smirk playing on his lips. "Let him go, Mom. If he wants to throw his life away playing the noble savior, let him. But do not expect us to bail you out when you realize helping people does not pay the mortgage. I just handled a messy divorce case for a guy who tried to live on dreams. It does not end well, little brother." Dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He towered over the table, his face flushed with pure anger. "Listen to me very carefully, David. If you walk out that door to take that pathetic, dead-end job, you are done. I will cut you off entirely. Your car, your apartment lease, gone. I will write you out of the inheritance so fast your head will spin. And that massive college fund I set aside for your future investments, I will hand it over to Carter right now. Choose, David. Choose right now." I looked at the three of them, my family, a family united entirely by money, status, and appearances, and completely divided by a profound lack of empathy. I realized in that moment that I did not belong with them. I never had. I stood up slowly. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the keys to the luxury sedan Dad had given me, and dropped them onto the polished mahogany surface. The heavy metal scratched the wood. "Keep it all," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but steady as a rock. "Keep the car. Keep the apartment. Keep the inheritance. I am going to do something that actually matters." I walked out of that massive house into the freezing night with nothing but the clothes on my back and a crushing, suffocating weight in my chest. Carter did not waste a single second. Within a week, he had officially taken over my apartment lease and sold the car. They completely erased me from their world. The next 3 years were grueling, brutal, and exhausting. The residential facility where I worked smelled constantly of cheap industrial floor wax, stale cafeteria food, and old sneakers. I worked 12 to 14-hour shifts, dealing with kids who had been written off by everyone else in society. I sat through endless court hearings, fighting for kids trapped in bitter custody battles where neither parent actually wanted them. I poured every ounce of my energy, my time, and my heart into them. It was there I met Gabriel. He was 15 years old, angry at the world, carrying a massive chip on his shoulder, and facing serious felony charges. Most of the staff had completely given up on him, labeling him a lost cause. But I saw the raw intelligence burning behind his furious, guarded eyes. I spent countless evenings sitting with him in the cramped rec room, helping him study, talking him down from panic attacks, showing him that his past mistakes did not have to dictate his entire future. The physical and mental toll of the job was incredibly heavy, but the emotional betrayal from my past life was much worse. My old college roommate, Dylan, used to work in social services right alongside me. We shared the same ideals. We wanted to change the world. But after a year of the grind, he quit. I ran into him at an upscale coffee shop downtown a few months later. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit and holding a briefcase that cost more than my monthly rent. "I took a job at Carter's law firm," Dylan told me. actively avoiding my eyes as he stirred his expensive latte. The salary was just too good to pass up, man. I mean, come on. You cannot change the world, David. You have to look out for number one. You should really think about giving your brother a call. He could probably get you a job in the mailroom. Losing Dylan to my brother's toxic, money-obsessed world stung bitterly. But the true, devastating isolation hit me the night I ended up in the emergency room. A violent fight had broken out at the facility between two older teenagers. I threw myself in the middle to separate them, and I took a brutal, sickening hit to the ribs. I sat in the sterile, freezing hospital waiting room for hours, breathing shallowly through the agonizing pain. The intake nurse asked if she should call my family. In a moment of weakness, a moment of desperately wanting my father to care, I gave her my parents' phone number. Hours passed. Every time the automatic sliding doors opened, I looked up, hoping to see my dad's face, hoping to see my mom rushing in, hoping that maybe, just maybe, a hospital visit and a serious injury would be enough to break the ice and bring them back to me. But it wasn't my dad who walked through those doors. It was Chloe. She rushed in, her winter coat thrown hastily over her flannel pajamas, her eyes wide with absolute panic. We had only been dating for a few months at that point. She worked crazy hours at a local bakery, but she had dropped everything, jumped out of bed in the middle of the night, and sped to the hospital. "Where are they?" she asked, her eyes darting around the completely empty waiting area. "Where is your family? They aren't coming?" I said softly, staring down at my bruised hands. Chloe didn't say a word. She didn't offer empty platitudes or pity me. She just sat down next to me on the uncomfortable plastic chair, wrapped her arms around my shoulders, and held my hand tightly. She stayed awake with me all night. That was the exact moment I knew I was going to marry her. And it was the exact moment I finally accepted, deep in my bones, that my blood relatives were complete strangers to me now. I thought the utter silence from my family meant they had simply moved on with their perfect, wealthy lives. I was incredibly wrong. They were still watching me, but only to entertain themselves. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, my Uncle Matthew showed up unannounced at the youth center. Matthew was Dad's younger brother. Growing up, he always played the cool uncle role, the one who supposedly understood me better than my rigid father. He walked into my cramped, poorly lit office holding 2 cups of expensive artisan coffee. "Hey kid," Matthew smiled warmly, looking around at the peeling yellow paint on the walls, the flickering fluorescent tube light, and the massive stack of donated, torn textbooks on my desk. "Just wanted to see how my favorite nephew is doing out here in the trenches. This place is really something." I felt a massive rush of gratitude. Finally, someone from the family who actually cared enough to check on me. We sat and talked for an hour. I opened up to him. I told him about the rehabilitation programs I was desperately trying to build, the state funding I was fighting to secure for these kids. Matthew nodded sympathetically, patting my shoulder. Before he left, he pulled out his smartphone and asked if he could take a few pictures of my office. "Just to show your folks you are safe and working hard," he claimed with a reassuring smile. "You know how your mother worries." 2 weeks later, my cousin called me late at night. She sounded thoroughly disgusted. "David, I think you should know what happened at the family Thanksgiving dinner last night," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Uncle Matthew brought out his phone right during the main course. He showed everyone the pictures of your office. The peeling paint, the old desk. He and your dad were laughing hysterically. Carter made a massive joke in front of everyone about how you were working in a literal slum and that you would probably be begging for a handout by Christmas. Matthew went down there just to gather material to mock you. It was a total setup." I squeezed the phone so hard the plastic casing actually creaked. The betrayal burned like battery acid in my veins. Matthew had looked me dead in the eye, drank coffee with me, pretended to care about my life, and then weaponized my struggle for a cheap, cruel laugh at a holiday party. They did not want me to fail so they could rush in and rescue me. They wanted me to fail so they could feel completely justified in their own greed and selfishness. From that moment on, I locked the heavy iron door to my past. I completely stopped seeking their approval. I threw myself entirely, obsessively into my work. I studied late into the night, earned advanced state certifications, and began writing comprehensive policy proposals for juvenile justice reform. I started getting noticed by people who actually mattered. The state capital started paying attention to my numbers. But my family knew absolutely none of this. To them, I was still just the pathetic punchline to Uncle Matthew's cruel Thanksgiving joke. 3 incredible years passed. My life changed drastically. The state governor had taken a profound, personal interest in my policy proposals. I was offered a position that changed everything, a position of massive influence and responsibility. But I kept my life strictly, fiercely private. When Chloe and I got engaged, we decided to keep the wedding small, intimate, and meaningful. But a tiny, stubborn part of me, that naive part of a son desperately wanting his father's presence on his wedding day, insisted on inviting my parents. I drove to their massive estate to hand-deliver the invitation. Walking into that house felt like walking into a cold museum. Dad was sitting in his custom leather armchair, reading the Financial Times. Carter was lounging on the imported Italian sofa, typing rapidly on his phone. Mom barely looked up from her tablet. I placed the simple, elegant, cream-colored invitation squarely on the glass coffee table. Chloe and I are getting married next month. We would like you to be there. Dad slowly lowered his newspaper. He glanced down at the envelope, then looked critically at my worn leather boots. Where is it? Some public park? A cafeteria? It is at the community center downtown, I said, keeping my voice completely even and calm. Carter let out a loud, barking laugh, tossing his phone onto the couch. A community center? Are you kidding me, David? You are going to make us sit on plastic chairs next to a basketball court? What's for dinner, Sloppy Joe's? It holds sentimental value, I replied, keeping my face entirely blank. It is where I started my first outreach program. Dad sighed heavily, rubbing his temples like my very existence was a massive, throbbing headache. Fine, I will attend. I will suffer through it. But on one condition. I am bringing Wyatt. Wyatt was Dad's biggest business partner, an incredibly arrogant billionaire who practically controlled the local commercial real estate market. Dad's entire sense of self-worth was entirely tied up in impressing Wyatt and securing his investments. Why do you need to bring Wyatt to my wedding? I asked, my eyes narrowing slightly. Because, Dad said sharply, pointing a finger at me. Wyatt asked about you last week at the golf course. He heard nasty rumors about my youngest son working in the slums for pennies. I need him to see that I am a supportive, philanthropic father, even if my son is a severe, embarrassing disappointment. I need to control the narrative of this family. If you want me there, Wyatt comes. End of discussion. Carter smirked, standing up to pour himself a glass of expensive bourbon from the crystal decanter. You should be thanking Dad on your knees, David. Wyatt's presence alone will probably double the net worth of your entire pathetic guest list. Speaking of net worth, I just got a massive promotion. I am making partner at the firm next week. We are about to land a gigantic state contract for the new youth rehabilitation infrastructure. We are talking millions of dollars in federal funding. You should really pay attention and see how the real world works, little brother. It is all about power. I looked at Carter. I looked at the smug, arrogant smile plastered across his face. A slow, quiet, profoundly satisfying realization settled over my entire body. I knew exactly which state contract he was talking about. I knew the exact, down-to-the-penny dollar amount of the federal funding. And I knew exactly whose desk the final approval file was currently sitting on. Mine. Congratulations on the promotion, Carter, I said softly, turning toward the heavy front door. I am absolutely sure you will get exactly what you deserve. I walked out, leaving the invitation on the glass table. The trap was officially set. They just didn't know they were the ones walking blindly into it. The tension during the wedding rehearsal the night before the ceremony was physically suffocating. Chloe and I had ordered a stack of pizzas and gathered in the rec room of the community center with our wedding party. My side of the guest list consisted of the dedicated youth counselors I worked with, a few former students like Gabriel, and Chloe's loud, loving, tight-knit family. Then the heavy doors banged open, and my family walked in. They moved together as a pack, radiating pure, unadulterated disdain. Carter had brought Julian, his equally arrogant colleague from the law firm. They stood in the far corner of the room, refusing to even touch the food, whispering loudly and pointing mockingly at the scuffed baseboards and the flickering fluorescent lighting. "Look at this place," Julian sneered, loud enough for Chloe's mother to hear perfectly clearly. "I feel like I need a tetanus shot just standing on this floor. How much do you think this whole pathetic thing cost? $50 and a coupon from the Sunday paper." Carter laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "Hey, it is all the social worker's tiny salary can afford. Let the peasants have their little pizza party. It makes them feel important." I felt my jaw tighten so hard my teeth ached. A thick vein throbbed against my temple. I took a step toward them, ready to throw them both out into the street, but Chloe grabbed my arm. Her touch instantly grounded me. "Don't," she whispered, looking up at me with calm, steady eyes. "Tomorrow, David. Let them dig their own graves tonight. Don't give them the satisfaction of a fight." I took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded. I walked out into the quiet hallway to get some air and to check my phone. I had a missed call from a very restricted, highly secure number. I dialed it back immediately, stepping into the shadows of the corridor. "Yes, sir," I said, leaning my back against the cold cinder block wall. "The federal policy draft is completely finished. I will have it securely transmitted to the White House by Monday morning. Please thank the President for his patience. The new infrastructure guidelines are locked in." I hung up, rubbing the back of my neck, feeling the exhaustion of the week catching up to me. When I turned around, my Aunt Sarah was standing just a few feet away near the rusted water fountain. She was staring at me, her eyes wide with absolute confusion and shock. She had heard every single word. "David?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Did you just say, the White House?" Aunt Sarah was Mom's younger sister. She was a timid, nervous woman who had spent her entire adult life terrified of my father's booming temper. She never spoke out of turn. "It is nothing, Aunt Sarah. Just a work call," I said smoothly, sliding the phone back into my pocket. "But you were talking about the President," she stammered, looking frantically back toward the open door of the rec room where Dad was currently holding court, loudly complaining about the lack of valet parking. "If you tell Uncle Robert, he will just laugh at you and say you are hearing things," I warned her gently, stepping closer. "Just go back inside and enjoy the pizza, Aunt Sarah." She swallowed hard, her eyes darting back and forth, and hurried back into the room, keeping her head down. She knew better than to rock the boat. She chose absolute silence, just like she had 5 years ago when Dad threw me out. It was the final confirmation I needed. None of them were ever going to change. The storm was coming, and I was not going to shelter them from it anymore. The morning of the wedding arrived with clear, crisp skies and a sharp, biting cold. The community center had been completely transformed overnight. Chloe and her family had worked absolute magic with draped white fabrics, warm amber string lights, and hundreds of borrowed wooden chairs. It looked simple, intimate, and profoundly beautiful. But as the guests began to arrive, the divide in the room became brutally, painfully apparent. Chloe's friends and my colleagues filled the right side of the aisle, laughing, hugging, and talking warmly. On the left side, my family sat in a tight, isolated cluster. They looked like furious royalty forced to mingle with commoners. I was standing hidden behind the heavy velvet curtain near the audiovisual booth, trying to stay out of sight before the ceremony began. That was when I heard it, my father's harsh, demanding voice echoing from the side corridor. I peeked cautiously around the edge of the curtain. Dad was cornering Nathan, a young college kid who was volunteering to run the soundboard for us. Carter stood right behind Dad, arms crossed, looking incredibly pleased with himself. "Listen to me very carefully, son," Dad told Nathan, slipping a crisp, folded $100 bill directly onto the soundboard. "During the reception, right after the best man gives his little speech, you are going to hand me the microphone. I am the father of the groom. I will make a toast." "Sure, Mr. Mason," Nathan stammered, looking visibly intimidated by my father's looming presence. "I can add you to the schedule. And when I have the microphone," Dad continued, a wicked, calculating gleam in his eye, "I am going to pivot the speech entirely. I am going to announce Carter's promotion to partner at the law firm. I have very important clients arriving today, and this is the perfect venue to show them that our family produces top-tier executives. I need the spotlight right on Carter. Do you understand me?" I felt a cold, hard rage settle deep in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't enough that they despised my wedding. It wasn't enough that they mocked the venue. They were actively planning to hijack the entire event. They were going to use the happiest day of my life as a cheap, desperate PR stunt for Carter's law firm. They wanted to humiliate me in front of Chloe's family and turn my wedding reception into a corporate press release. Carter adjusted his expensive silk tie, looking at his reflection in the glass window of the booth. "Make sure the volume is turned all the way up, kid. We need Wyatt to hear every single word clearly. This is a big day for the firm." They walked away, chuckling quietly to themselves. I stepped out from behind the curtain. Nathan looked up, startled, his face flushing bright red. "David, man, I'm so sorry. He just shoved the money at me and—" "Keep the money, Nathan," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Buy yourself something nice. But when my father asks for the microphone later today, you tell him the battery is completely dead. Tell him the wire snapped. Tell him whatever you want. But that microphone absolutely does not leave your hand." Nathan nodded vigorously, looking incredibly relieved. I turned and walked toward the front doors. The final pieces of their arrogant, malicious puzzle were falling perfectly into place. They thought they controlled the board. They had absolutely no idea they were playing a completely different game. 15 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, the heavy oak doors of the community center opened, and Wyatt walked in. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit and an expression of profound, unfiltered boredom. He looked around the entrance hall, his nose slightly wrinkled as if he had stepped in something foul on the street. Dad practically sprinted across the room to greet him, bowing slightly, looking desperate. "Wyatt, thank you so much for coming. I know this isn't the country club, and I apologize for the rustic atmosphere. My son David is a bit eccentric. He insists on this bizarre charity lifestyle." Wyatt grunted, handing his heavy wool coat to Carter as if Carter were a hired coat check boy. "Let's just get this over with quickly, Robert. I have a tea time at the golf course at 3 o'clock. As Dad desperately guided Wyatt to the front row, treating him like a visiting king, Dylan walked through the front doors. My old friend, the one who sold out his morals for the corporate salary. He spotted me standing near the altar and strutted over, looking me up and down with obvious pity. "David, buddy?" Dylan grinned, clapping me far too hard on the shoulder. "Cute little charity event you've got going on here. Carter told me you insisted on the community center. Still trying to save the world on minimum wage, huh? Must be tough." "I am doing exactly what I set out to do, Dylan," I said, keeping my posture completely relaxed. Dylan laughed, a loud, condescending sound. "Right? Well, Carter's firm is about to close that massive state contract for the juvenile infrastructure. We are talking 8 figures, David. If you ever get tired of living paycheck to paycheck and eating ramen, let me know. I might be able to find you a desk job doing basic paperwork in the basement." "I will keep that in mind," I replied, a small, genuine smile creeping onto my face. Dylan had absolutely no idea how deeply he was digging his own grave right now. I looked over at Gabriel, my groomsman. He was glaring daggers at Dylan, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. I caught his eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Not yet. The string quartet we hired began to tune their instruments, the beautiful, haunting notes echoing through the hall. The guests started taking their final seats. Wyatt sat right next to my mother, looking utterly miserable. Carter sat directly behind him, leaning forward to desperately whisper strategic business metrics into Wyatt's ear. They were completely ignoring the fact that a sacred wedding ceremony was about to happen. I stood at the front, planting my feet firmly on the ground. I looked out at the faces of my family. The sheer arrogance, the utter lack of respect. They had turned my wedding into a cheap networking event. They thought I was a massive failure. They thought I was nothing but a stepping stone for Carter's ambition. The music started playing softly. It was almost time for Chloe to walk down the aisle. But before that could happen, the final confrontation had to occur. My father suddenly stood up from his seat in the front row and marched directly toward me. Dad grabbed my arm tightly, pulling me roughly into the shadows near the side exit door. His grip was bruising, his face flushed dark red with anger and embarrassment. "What are you doing?" he hissed, his eyes darting nervously back toward Wyatt in the front row. "The music is starting and half the chairs in the back are completely empty. Where are the rest of your guests? Are they too busy picking pockets in the alley to attend a wedding?" "My guests are exactly who I want them to be," I said, forcefully pulling my arm out of his harsh grasp. "You embarrass me?" Dad snarled, stepping closer until he was entirely in my personal space, his breath smelling of expensive coffee. "Wyatt is sitting right there, calculating exactly how much of a failure my youngest son is. Look at this place, David. It is pathetic. You are pathetic. You could have been a partner at the firm. You could have had a real life. You could have had power. Instead, I am standing in a filthy community center that smells like bleach, watching you marry a baker, surrounded by absolute street trash." His words were vicious, designed to completely break me. 5 years ago, they would have. 5 years ago, I would have shrunk back, desperate for his approval, desperate for him to just love me. But standing there now, listening to the man who shared my blood reduce beautiful human lives to mere dollar signs, I felt nothing but cold, crystal-clear clarity. "You are right, Dad," I said, my voice incredibly steady and unwavering. "This isn't your world. And you are right about something else, too. The most important guest hasn't arrived yet." Dad scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes in disgust. "Oh, who is it? The manager of the local soup kitchen? Give me a break, David. You are a nobody." Before I could even answer him, my phone vibrated intensely in my chest pocket. One heavy buzz. Two. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a single, highly classified word. Luke. Luke was the head of state security. I looked up from the glowing screen, staring directly into my father's furious, hateful eyes. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just smiled. "You should really go back to your seat, Dad," I said quietly. "My VIP is here. And I promise you, you do not want to be standing in the way when the doors open." Dad opened his mouth to hurl another venomous insult, but a strange, piercing sound from outside cut him off completely. It started as a faint wail in the distance, growing louder and more intense by the second. The sound of heavy, high-performance engines and thick tires crunching violently against the gravel of the parking lot. The low murmur of the guests inside the hall suddenly stopped. People turned their heads toward the frosted front windows. The string quartet faltered, the cellist missing a note in pure confusion. Dad frowned deeply, stepping away from me and looking toward the main entrance. "What is that noise? Did one of your friends call the police?" I smoothed the lapels of my jacket and walked right past him, stepping out of the dark shadows and taking my rightful place at the exact center of the altar. "Like I said, Dad, the VIP is here." The sirens cut off abruptly right outside the heavy oak doors, plunging the room back into a tense silence. Through the frosted glass windows of the community center, brilliant flashing red and blue lights painted chaotic, sweeping shadows across the walls. The guests began to stand up nervously, craning their necks. Panic started to ripple through the room like an electric current. "What is going on?" Mom gasped, clutching Dad's arm in terror. "Did one of his gang member friends bring the cops here? Are we being raided?" Carter stood up quickly, puffing out his chest, desperately trying to look authoritative in front of Wyatt. "Stay calm, everyone. I am a lawyer. I know the local precinct captain. I will handle this." He marched toward the front doors, clearly ready to throw his weight around and threaten a lawsuit. But before Carter could even reach the brass handle, the double doors swung open with violent, terrifying force. Four massive men in dark, perfectly tailored suits stepped into the room. They weren't local police. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision, their sharp eyes scanning the room instantly, analyzing every single person. Coiled earpieces curled tightly behind their ears. One of them held the heavy door open, while the others quickly secured the perimeter, their hands resting naturally and dangerously near their waistbands. The entire community center fell dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the linoleum. Luke, the head of the security detail, stepped forward. He was a mountain of a man with a stern, unforgiving face. He looked around the room, his eyes sweeping past my terrified family, past Carter, who had frozen entirely mid-step, and locked directly onto me at the altar. Luke gave me a sharp, deeply respectful nod. "Clear the center aisle," Luke commanded, his voice booming like thunder through the silent hall. It wasn't a request. It was an absolute order. The guests hastily shuffled back, practically pulling their folding chairs out of the way. My family looked completely paralyzed. Wyatt, the incredibly arrogant billionaire who had been complaining about the venue all morning, suddenly stood up so fast his metal chair tipped over backwards with a loud, echoing clatter. Wyatt's face had drained of all color. He was staring intensely out the open doors, looking at the massive convoy parked directly in front of the building. Two huge black SUVs flanked a gleaming, immaculate, jet-black Rolls-Royce. Wyatt knew cars. He knew money. He knew license plates. And he knew absolute, terrifying power when he saw it. "Robert," Wyatt hissed, grabbing my dad's shoulder, his fingers digging in tight enough to bruise. "Robert, whose detail is that?" "Those are state plates. The 01 plates." Dad looked utterly bewildered, his mouth hanging slightly open. I don't know, Wyatt. I have no idea what is happening." Carter slowly backed away from the doors, his entire lawyer bravado evaporating into thin air. He stumbled back to his seat, his eyes wide, staring at the empty doorway. The flashing police lights outside bounced off the walls, casting an eerie glow over my family's terrified faces. They thought the police had come to raid a slum wedding. They thought I was about to be humiliated and arrested on the biggest day of my life. Then, a tall, distinguished figure stepped out of the back of the Rolls-Royce and walked slowly into the bright light of the doorway. Governor Arthur Lincoln stepped into the community center. He was a man who commanded absolute, unquestionable authority. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, his posture straight. The state flag pin glinted sharply on his lapel under the lights. The silence in the room shifted instantly from confused panic to absolute, mind-numbing shock. Every single person in that room, and in the entire state, knew that face. He was on the news every night. He controlled the budget. He was the most powerful man within a 500-mile radius. Wyatt's knees actually buckled. He sank heavily back down into his seat, his eyes bulging. Dad's jaw practically hit the linoleum floor. Mom covered her mouth with both hands, stifling a loud gasp. Uncle Matthew, the man who had mocked my office at Thanksgiving, looked like he was about to pass out entirely. Governor Lincoln didn't look at any of them. He didn't acknowledge Wyatt. He walked straight down the center aisle, his heavy footsteps echoing loudly in the quiet room. He walked right past the rows of cheap folding chairs, past the grocery store flowers, and came directly to the altar where I was standing. When he reached me, the stern, calculated political mask melted entirely off his face. He broke into a massive, genuinely warm smile and pulled me into a fierce, tight bear hug. "Sorry I'm late, son," the governor said, his voice incredibly loud and clear, carrying effortlessly to every single corner of the room. Air Force One was delayed on the tarmac in D.C., and you know how the president loves to talk. I told my driver to break every single speed limit on the highway to get here in time. The words hit the front row like a physical, devastating explosion. Air Force One. The president. Carter made a sickening, choking sound in the back of his throat. Dylan, my old friend who had bragged about his massive salary just 20 minutes ago, looked like he had been struck by lightning. The governor pulled back from the hug, keeping his heavy hands firmly on my shoulders, looking at me with pure, undeniable pride. "I wouldn't miss this for the world, David. You have done incredible things." Then Governor Lincoln turned slowly. He looked directly at the front row on the left side. He looked at my father, who was now sweating profusely, his face pale and clammy. He looked at Carter, whose hands were actually shaking. And he looked at Wyatt, who was staring down at the floor in sheer terror. The governor's eyes narrowed slightly. His voice dropped, losing all its warmth, taking on the sharp, deadly edge of a politician who knew exactly how to completely destroy an opponent. "You must be the family," Governor Lincoln said, his voice dripping with icy authority, staring directly into my father's wide, terrified eyes. Dad swallowed hard, his throat bobbing visibly. He scrambled frantically to his feet, trying desperately to muster his old corporate authority. But standing in front of the governor, he looked incredibly small. He looked terrified. "Yes, Governor," Dad stammered, his voice cracking, his hands trembling. I am Robert Mason, David's father. We are so honored you came to our little charity event." The governor tilted his head, a cold, incredibly dangerous smile forming slowly on his lips. The storm I had been patiently waiting 5 years for had finally made landfall. "Gemini," said the governor, tilted his head, a cold, incredibly dangerous smile forming slowly on his lips. "The storm I had been patiently waiting 5 years for had finally made landfall." "Charity event," Governor Lincoln repeated. He let the words hang in the air, tasting them, letting the sheer absurdity of the statement sink into the silent room. He did not extend his hand for my father to shake. He just stood there, radiating absolute power. Dad swallowed hard again. He looked around nervously, realizing that Wyatt was watching his every single move. Dad tried to force a confident chuckle, but it sounded like a dry cough. "Yes, well, David has always been a bit of an idealist. We try to support his little projects when we can." Carter, desperate to salvage the networking opportunity of a lifetime, quickly stepped out from his row. He reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out a thick, embossed business card, and thrust it toward the governor. "Governor Lincoln, an absolute honor," Carter said, putting on his best, slimiest courtroom smile. He was the perfect predatory lawyer. "Carter Mason, senior partner at..." Governor Lincoln did not even look at the business card. He slowly turned his head, his piercing eyes locking onto Carter. "Put your hand away, son. I am not here to talk to ambulance chasers." Carter froze. The color drained completely from his face. His hand hovered awkwardly in the air for a terrible, agonizing second before he slowly pulled it back, staring at the floor. Governor Lincoln turned his attention back to my father. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Let me get this straight, Robert. You think you are sitting in a charity event. You think your son is running little projects." Dad nodded weakly, his corporate bravado completely shattered. He is a social worker, Governor." The governor let out a sharp, humorless laugh. It echoed loudly in the cavernous space. "A social worker? Is that what you call the director of statewide youth initiatives?" Dad blinked rapidly. "Director of what?" "Your son," the governor said, raising his voice so every single person in the back rows could hear perfectly, "is the highest-ranking executive of juvenile policy in this entire state. He reports directly to me." For the last 3 years, he has completely revolutionized our infrastructure. He handles a budget of over $50 million. Mom let out a loud, strangled gasp. She gripped the back of the folding chair so hard her knuckles turned completely white. But it goes further than that, the governor continued, his eyes locked onto my father like a predator. Last month, the President of the United States personally called my office. He wanted to speak to the man whose policies had dropped youth crime rates by 40%. He wanted to speak to your son. David is now a senior advisor to the White House Task Force on Juvenile Justice. He flies to Washington on Air Force One. He writes federal policy that shapes this entire country. The silence in the room was absolute. It was deafening. My father looked physically sick. His skin had turned a pale, chalky gray. He looked at me, standing at the altar, as if he had absolutely no idea who I was. Mom practically fell back into her chair. He never told us. He never mentioned any of this. If we had known, perhaps he would have told you. The governor cut her off sharply. If you had ever bothered to ask him about his life instead of mocking his salary, perhaps he would have shared his success if you hadn't treated him like a disappointment. Governor Lincoln gestured expansively around the room, pointing at the scuffed floors, the peeling paint, and the simple decorations. You called this a cheap venue, Robert. I heard you complaining about the smell when I walked in. Do you have any idea where you are actually sitting? Dad shook his head slowly, completely terrified to speak. This building, the governor declared, is the central headquarters for David's statewide foundation. He bought this entire block last year with federal grants. He chose to keep the old walls to remind his students of where they came from. But the technology, the resources, the medical facilities in the back rooms, they rival the best private hospitals in the country. You are sitting in a multimillion-dollar facility, Robert. Your son built this from nothing. He built it while you were busy cutting him out of your will. Uncle Matthew, who had taken those mocking pictures at Thanksgiving, slumped down in his seat, trying to make himself completely invisible. But Carter was not finished. Carter was a lawyer, and lawyers hate to lose. Even in the face of absolute destruction, Carter's ego demanded a final, desperate swing. With all due respect, Governor, Carter stammered, his voice shaking violently. My firm is a major player in this state. We are actually handling the legal framework for the new state juvenile infrastructure, the massive federal contract. We are closing it on Monday. I am making partner because of that deal. Governor Lincoln stopped. He slowly turned his entire body to face Carter. The governor looked at my brother like he was a bug on the windshield of a very fast car. Are you talking about the Alpha Initiative contract? The governor asked quietly. Yes, sir, Carter said, a tiny glimmer of desperate hope returning to his eyes. An 8-figure deal. We are the lead counsel. The governor actually smiled this time, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of an executioner. That is fascinating, Carter, the governor said softly, because I received a memo yesterday morning from the chairman of the selection board. He officially rejected your firm's bid. He noted that your legal team severely lacked empathy and focused too heavily on corporate profit margins rather than rehabilitation. Your firm lost that contract entirely. Carter staggered backward, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Rejected? No, that is impossible. I spoke to the committee. We had the best numbers. Who is the chairman? Governor Lincoln stepped aside, gesturing openly toward me. You are looking at him. David personally reviewed your proposal. David personally threw it in the garbage. The sound that came out of Carter's throat was something between a sob and a gasp. His entire world, his promotion, his massive salary, his entire arrogant identity, had just been completely incinerated by the brother he had mocked for 5 years. Wyatt had seen enough. The billionaire stood up, his face furious. He did not look at Carter. He looked directly at my father. You told me your son was a bum? Wyatt snarled, his voice thick with absolute disgust. You dragged me to this wedding to show me how magnanimous you are to a failure. You lied to me, Robert. You are a fool. You drove away the most valuable asset your family ever produced. Wyatt turned his back on my father, marched straight down the aisle, and walked out the heavy oak doors, disappearing into the cold morning air. My father reached out a trembling hand toward Wyatt's retreating back, but he didn't say a word. He couldn't. His entire carefully constructed empire of lies and arrogance had just collapsed around him in less than 5 minutes. Governor Lincoln turned back to me. The harshness vanished from his face instantly. He squeezed my shoulder firmly. "Now then," he said warmly, "I believe I am here to witness a wedding. Do you mind if I take a seat, David? Right in the front row, sir," I said, a massive weight lifting off my chest. The governor took a seat on the right side of the aisle, sitting next to Chloe's father. My family was left completely alone on the left side, sitting in absolute, humiliated silence. The storm had passed. The air was clear. The string quartet, after a frantic nod from the conductor, started playing the bridal march. The doors opened, and Chloe walked down the aisle. She was breathtaking. The chaos of the last 10 minutes completely faded away the second I saw her smile. She walked toward me, her eyes shining with unshed tears, her father holding her arm. When she reached the altar, she took my hands. Her skin was warm. "I told you to let them dig their own graves," she whispered, a fierce, loving light in her eyes. "You are always right," I whispered back. The ceremony was incredibly beautiful. It was sacred and quiet, a complete contrast to the toxic corporate greed my family had brought into the room. When it was time for the rings, Gabriel stepped forward. His hands shook slightly as he handed me the gold band. He looked at me with pure reverence. "Thank you," Gabriel whispered, a tear escaping down his cheek, "for everything." I slipped the ring onto Chloe's finger. We exchanged our vows, promising to protect each other, to build a life based on truth and compassion, not bank accounts and empty titles. When the pastor pronounced us husband and wife, the right side of the room erupted into massive, joyful applause. I kissed my wife, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt completely, truly at peace. As we walked back down the aisle together, I glanced briefly at the left side of the room. Aunt Sarah was openly crying, holding a tissue to her face, a look of profound regret in her eyes. She knew she should have spoken up years ago. Mom was staring at the floor. Dad looked completely hollowed out. The reception was held in the massive gymnasium in the back of the center. The string lights glowed warmly. Nathan, the soundboard kid, was happily playing music. Everyone was dancing, laughing, and eating. Governor Lincoln was casually drinking a beer, chatting with the youth counselors, treating them with absolute respect. I was standing near the edge of the dance floor, watching Chloe dance with her father, when I felt a presence behind me. I turned around. It was my father and Carter. They looked incredibly uncomfortable. Carter was fidgeting with his tie. Dad cleared his throat, trying to pull his shoulders back, trying to reclaim some tiny scrap of his lost authority. "David?" Dad started, his voice completely devoid of its usual booming confidence. We need to talk. We need to clear the air. Obviously, there has been a massive misunderstanding over the last few years. If you had just told me you were working with the governor, we could have aligned our goals. Your brother and I would like to sit down with you next week and discuss some strategic partnerships between the foundation and the law firm." I stared at him. Even now, even after the absolute destruction of his ego, his first instinct was to try and extract value from me. He didn't want a son. He wanted a business connection. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. I did not yell. I did not lose my temper. I spoke with the quiet, absolute authority of a man who no longer needed anything from them. "There is no misunderstanding, Robert," I said, using his first name intentionally. I saw him flinch. "You made your values perfectly clear 5 years ago at that dinner table. You cut me off because I didn't fit your business model. You brought Wyatt here today to mock me. You tried to bribe the sound guy to hijack my reception. Carter looked down at his expensive shoes. I am not your strategic partner, I continued, my voice hard as steel. I am the man who protects kids from people exactly like you. You are here today because I allowed you to witness my life. You are guests in this building. Do not approach the governor. Do not hand out your business cards. Sit at your table, eat your dinner, and when it is over, you will leave. If you cross that boundary, my security detail will physically remove you from the premises. Dad's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at my eyes and saw absolutely nothing but cold, unbreakable resolve. He slowly nodded, looking completely defeated. He turned and walked back to his dark corner table, Carter trailing silently behind him. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The weeks following the wedding were a whirlwind of absolute change. The power dynamic had completely shifted, and the consequences of my family's actions began to hit them like a freight train. Wyatt completely pulled his investments from my father's corporate portfolio. Wyatt was a ruthless businessman, and he realized that if my father could brutally misjudge and throw away his own highly successful son, he could not be trusted with millions of dollars in real estate assets. Dad's firm took a massive financial hit. Carter's situation was even worse. Losing the Alpha Initiative contract sent a massive shockwave through his law firm. The senior partners demanded an explanation. When they discovered Carter had actively mocked the chairman of the board who controlled the funding, they were furious. Carter did not get his promotion to partner. He was quietly demoted to a back-office administrative role to keep him away from high-level clients. One afternoon, I was sitting in my office reviewing budget files when my phone rang. It was Dylan. David, hey man, Dylan said, his voice dripping with desperation. Listen, things are getting really rough at the firm. They are cutting salaries left and right. Carter has lost his mind. I was thinking, maybe you have an opening at the foundation? I always loved social work, you know? I want to get back to my roots. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I appreciate the call, Dylan, but my staff needs to be entirely dedicated to the mission. We don't have room for people who jump ship when the money looks better somewhere else. Best of luck with the job hunt. I hung up the phone and blocked his number. A month later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from my father. It wasn't a business proposal. It was a desperate plea for a simple dinner. Just him, my mother, and me. No Carter. No Wyatt. Chloe encouraged me to go. You hold all the cards now, David, she said. See what he has to say. We met at a small, bustling family restaurant on the edge of town. It was owned by Marcus, another former student of mine who had turned his life around and opened his own business. I walked in and sat down at the booth. Mom looked incredibly fragile. Dad looked 10 years older. For the first 20 minutes, nobody spoke. Finally, Dad pushed his untouched plate away and looked at me. His eyes were red. I am sorry, Dad said. The words sounded incredibly foreign in his mouth, like he had never used them before. I was wrong. I was so completely, horribly wrong about everything. I didn't say anything. I just waited. When I was in my 20s, Dad continued, his voice breaking slightly, I tried to start a non-profit for homeless veterans. I poured my entire life savings into it. I worked myself to the bone. But the funding dried up. The city turned their backs on me. I lost everything, David. I was completely bankrupted and humiliated. People laughed at me. He looked down at his hands, twisting his napkin. I promised myself I would never be weak again. I promised I would build an iron wall of money and power so nobody could ever hurt me. When you told me you wanted to do social work, all I saw was my own failure. I saw you walking straight into the same meat grinder that destroyed me. I thought if I cut you off, if I forced you into the corporate world, I was protecting you. But I was just acting out of sheer terror. Mom reached over and placed her hand over his. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. We were so blinded by status, David. We forgot how to be parents. We forgot how to love you for who you actually are. I sat back, absorbing his words. It didn't excuse the cruelty. It didn't excuse the 5 years of isolation or the mocking at Thanksgiving. But it explained the deep, rotting fear that drove his actions. I appreciate you telling me that, Dad, I said quietly. But words don't fix 5 years of damage. I forgive you, because holding on to the anger is exhausting. But you need to understand that the dynamic has permanently changed. I am not the kid desperate for your approval anymore. You have to earn a place in my life. They both nodded vigorously, accepting the terms without a single argument. Time passed. 2 years later, Chloe and I welcomed our first child, a beautiful baby boy. We named him Gabriel after my best man. The foundation expanded across 5 different states, pulling thousands of kids off the streets and giving them real, tangible futures. My parents slowly became a part of our lives again. They attended Gabriel's birthday parties. They sat quietly in the corner, playing with their grandson, never offering unsolicited advice, never bringing up money, never mentioning Wyatt. They finally knew their place. Even Carter eventually surrendered. I received a short email from him right after my son was born. I am profoundly jealous of you, David. Not because of the governor or the White House, but because you sleep soundly at night knowing you are a good man. I am trying to figure out how to be one. Congratulations on your son. It was a small victory, but a real one. Standing in the parking lot of the community center late one evening, long after the staff had gone home, I watched a group of teenagers playing basketball under the floodlights. The sound of their laughter echoed off the brick walls. I leaned against my car, feeling the cool night air on my face. I thought about the journey. I thought about the freezing night I walked out of my parents' mansion, leaving the luxury car keys on the table. I thought about the grueling shifts, the hospital visits, the cruel jokes. And I thought about the look on my father's face when the governor stepped out of that Rolls-Royce. I realized then what true success actually looks like. It isn't a massive corporate salary. It isn't an inheritance or a promotion at a law firm. Success is building a life so fiercely authentic, so deeply rooted in compassion and purpose, that the people who doubted you have absolutely no choice but to stand back in total awe. I didn't change the world to prove them wrong. I changed the world because it needed changing. Proving them wrong was just a beautiful, deeply satisfying bonus. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long journey, but it means the world to me that you shared this time with me. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Family dynamics can be incredibly toxic, and walking away from the people who are supposed to love you is one of the hardest things a person can ever do. But sometimes, burning the bridge is the only way to light your path forward. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members or prove your worth to people who refuse to see it? Please, share your experiences in the comments. I read every single one of them, and this community is built on supporting each other. Now, for those of you who are still here, who listen to every word, you are part of an exclusive group. Let's see who belongs to the 1% Club. If you made it to the very end of this video, please comment the letter W below. W stands for winner. It lets me know that you are part of the incredible group of people who stand by the truth and value real success over empty status. Please hit that like button if you enjoyed the story, and make sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.